Good evening. It is 6 p.m., January 10th, 2012. This meeting of the Yountville Zoning and Design Review Board is called to order.
It's not January.
It's July 10th. Goodness. I will nevertheless call the meeting to order. I'm glad. And I will note that Member Durham is absent, and I will ask for unanimous consent to adopt our agenda as it's presented. Hearing no objection, it's adopted. Any corrections or additions to the minutes of May 8th, 2012? Seeing none, I will also ask for unanimous consent to approve those minutes as presented.
Aye.
Seeing no objection, they are adopted. We will proceed to public comment. Mr. Scoggins, would you care to address us tonight on anything that's not on the agenda?
No, thank you.
All right. Consent agenda is vacant, as is public hearing, presentation and discussion. Sandra, pray go ahead with the draft signed ordinance report.
Well, as you know, we held a workshop here back in May, and we presented two broad categories for your review. One was portable signs, and the other was sign area. Thereafter, we took the workshop to the town council, received comments, and we've incorporated those into the draft ordinance before you tonight. And it relates mainly to those two issues, although it was also an opportunity to clean up bad references to code sections and different items. So we did a little bit of cleanup as well. With regards to portable signs, when we first presented it, we were thinking that perhaps we should continue the practice of open signs in town. But after bringing it to this board and the council, we feel it's better to have to maintain the prohibition on portable signs, because it can become difficult to allow some but not others, and then that encourages other use of portable signs by businesses. So we are proposing one exception for menu signs, and there's just the one menu sign at Bistro Gentil, and then exceptions for special events, for nonprofit special events, and that would be something like Arts in April, allowing them to put out temporary signs. And the other was raised at the town council because at the community center there are temporary portable signs used there for meetings, etc. So in addition to the real estate signs, which are already permitted. So that's how we've addressed the portable sign issue, and we think that it'll be more in keeping with the sign ordinance to reduce clutter and just have a more restrained sign image in town. And then the changes are listed in the staff report, and I won't go over those because they're just on that broad topic. This will definitely lead to some enforcement in town and some removing of portable sign usage over time, but we'll take that next step and we'll start a strong enforcement effort, because there have been signs that we've been turning have been waiting to have an answer on, let's say. There's a directional sign for the parking lot up at Jessup. There are all the open signs and just A-frame signs in general. The other area discussed was sign area, and the new definition just provides more detail on how to measure the sign when it's on a building, a freestanding sign, whether it has a border or not, whether it's multi-sided or not, and so we think it's a lot clearer. Two new issues have arisen since we brought the workshop to you. One is wine bottles that were being placed outside of tasting rooms to advertise their items. And these are defined as advertising statuary under the sign ordinance. And they're only allowed when they're permanently affixed. They're not for sale. So this portable type item that is indicative of the service or the goods sold just hasn't really been envisioned or allowed. The question before you is whether the section on the advertising statuary is really meant to address this type of issue, or whether it makes sense to open up to allow some of these decor items at business entries. And if we do allow them, how would we define them? We would want to keep it restrained. We wouldn't want any of the situations in the staff report, the two examples I gave of of businesses in the past who are placing really large-scale items outside their doors. Although there is definitely, a blurred line of when something that's on one side and not the other. A lot clearer with the wine bottle, but the bicycle at Bistro Gentil is mentioned, and staff thinks it's worth discussing because these items do bring some interest to the streetscape without being really cluttery or offensive or anything. So let's try to discuss that a little. The other item is with menu signs, and we had a tasting room ask whether they could use one to list their wine flights. And the definition for menu sign is very specific, that it's for restaurants only, and it just wasn't envisioned for use at wine tasting rooms. Wine tasting rooms feel like they need lots of signage. They need to give their potential guests notice of what they're about, and they think that guests are afraid to enter an empty space, and they're convinced that this would help business. We've noted in the staff report that they're not exactly like restaurant signs where people really can use that information because it's indicative of the whole menu style of the restaurant and what the dining experience is like. And wine tasting is so much more scaled back. So anyway, the question is whether we should allow a broader scope of businesses to display menu signs. So what we're looking for is your review and comment on the draft ordinance tonight that's before you, and whether there are any other changes we should make, and then a discussion of the two new items so that we can include that in the next staff report to the town council.
Questions of staff about this report?
I think this is a question. So when we're doing the page 2 of the ordinance display surface, item number 2, sign face, all sides of a multi-sided sign, how would we quantify something like Rosinger's? It's three-dimensional. So do we just call that 2 sides? Do we take...
I think it's too difficult to measure the three-dimensional aspect, and there are clearly 2 sign faces, even though it has that 3D image component.
But if it were to, say, be a triangle and each side had a sign on it, we would
Clearly
count each
count all
one
3.
of those. Okay.
Just to follow up to that, because advertising statuary would be considered a sign, right, if it's permanent. And so it's a three-dimensional object that's unlike Rosinger's. It could be a human sculpture or something like that. So how do you measure that?
They're prohibited, so we don't measure them.
No, I thought they would be allowed.
Well, under, if we get into...
Well, because you were
the-
talking, you used the example of the garden center, right? And that was allowed, and then the other one wasn't allowed. So
But they'd be apart from copy on a sign. They would be accepted as more of an object that's an art object or an ornamentation.
So you would say that's what the bicycle in front of Bistro Gentil is?
I consider it a landscape element. It's not a sign. They're not selling bicycles.
Okay.
But, yeah. Then if you paint Bistro Gentil on it, we start
That's a
blurring the
sign.
lines more. Okay.
And then you wouldn't be allowed to have it, is that correct?
Well, it could be approved as a permanent advertising statuary out front.
I should think
And
a
then
bicycle,
how
I
would
should
you
think a
figure that
into the
bicycle would be a
sign?
portable sign.
If it's movable, of course, but I think that one's fixed
I
at
think
location.
it's grown over.
It's Jane down.
So then, if that was the case, would you just measure where it said Bistro Gentil, or would you measure the whole bicycle?
Quite frankly, you've stumped me.
Well, I think if I can ask, the proposed ordinance says if there is no readily discernible purpose for whatever the sign medium is other than to support signage, you measure the entire area. So if we can say this wall has a clear purpose to screen, you just take your rectilinear shape, that's what the draft ordinance is, and measure that. So if the bicycle had no purpose but to support signage, and that's a judgment call, I think you'd Make as many rectangles as you could around the
Circumference
entire,
of
the bicycle.
the wheels and then the tubes. and-
That is the revision of the language that's in front of us, that if there's a legitimate purpose for the medium other than to support signage, you only count the sign area.
So then,
In the case of the Bistro Gentil bicycle, it could be considered a landscape element, and those were some of the exemptions from,
which I can see that, but,
as
the-
Chair James mentioned, it's definitely somewhat of a judgment call.
right. But then if they had their name on it, then it would raise the level of difficulty. Okay.
Any other questions about the report? Would the public care to comment on this item?
Not this time, thanks.
All right. So I think we can make recommendations. Who'd like to begin?
I'll go first because I wrote some things down. As far all the changes look good, so I'll start there. As far as the advertising statuary, I think it reminds me of our last meeting where we were talking about are we over managing what can or can't be. And so I drove through town and I looked at everything that could be potentially considered. And so we've got Masonry, who was putting, up until it's gotten so hot, was putting bottles of wine in their little bicycle go-kart thing out front. So that would be considered. You go to barrels, because if we're talking wine bottles, we're obviously talking barrels too, because if that's in front of a tasting room. So you've got Jessup Cellars has barrels, Summerston had barrels, Page had barrels but has removed them along with their bottles of wine. And then I was like, well, what about the clothing outside of Overland? Overland has 2 mannequins with clothes on them. They sell clothes there. So then you got to consider that. Is that a sign too? Is that a movable sign because they're actually movable mannequin things? Is that
If reanimated, perhaps.
it got to be, it seems really onerous to get that persnickety. I would suggest that anything like that's okay as far as it's decorative. And I would just suggest let's not have something that doesn't have the name of the establishment on it. Have that be the limitation.
So you'd be okay if they moved it in and out every day? Or are you okay with it being there all the time?
That's a good question. I think I don't consider it a sign. Like, so let's say Overland. They're moving the clothes in and out every day. That doesn't seem like it should come under advertising statuary or a sign or any of these ordinances. As far as barrels go, if they're moving them in or out every day, I don't really have a preference if they move them or don't move them. I think it goes back to being like the bicycle, that it's decorative. It's decorative landscaping, goes with landscaping, architecture, that whole thing. I think that's where all that stuff falls. And then menu signs, I think it should be limited to restaurants. That's pretty simple for me. Next.
May I make a comment?
Do.
I don't see these apparel mannequins and barrels and bicycles as being signage. They're marketing devices. They're meant to promote some concept of what's going on in there, whether it's the bicycle and the essence of France, the countryside, with the guys selling. You wouldn't know what was going on in Overland unless you actually walked in there. It's quite subdued in its presentation to the public. I don't go in there, quite frankly, but I'm astounded that they're still there, so something must be going on. Barrels out front to encourage the marketing essence of wanting to come in and taste and relax and savor the essence of Yountville. I don't see these as signs. These are guys trying to build a business. My inclination is to give them quite a bit of latitude to be successful and thrive and pay taxes and hire people. And if it means something as innocuous as a barrel or a bike, or, I don't get it. To me, as a marketing guy, they're trying to keep the lights on for all of us. And to drift off into some signage control, and that just seems strange to me. but that's my opinion.
I was going to pose a question to everybody, but maybe you guys want to make comments first. What comes to mind for me is the table and chairs and two mannequins and stuff that Bovinia had. That, quite frankly, was a bit disturbing and odd. But if we don't limit these other things, how can we limit that? And so I wonder if there's a way to differentiate.
Dispense good taste?
I think there is, and I'm going to
Differentiate between-
suggest
okay.
it when it's my turn. Mr. Anglin, go ahead.
Well, the only thing that I wanted to discuss is the signage for, or the menus for tasting rooms. And I wanted to find out, when they came to you, were they asking for the ability to put out their food that they pair with the wines, or just what the prices were for different types of tasting?
It would be the different wine flights, it would be different food and wine pairing options, so it would be the full
In the
scope
prices
their
of what those
services.
things are. From my standpoint, I think that actually is valuable, because people don't really know how the tasting experience goes and how much it's going to cost. And sometimes they're really surprised when they get their bill, or they're told how much it's going to cost once they've sat down in the tasting room. So I would say, as in a restaurant, people want to get a sense of what the price is for what the foods that are being offered. I think that it wouldn't be unusual to ask, have the same thing for the wine tasting rooms, and be controlled by the same size and location as the restaurants. So I would open that part of it up and be a little broader than just restaurants, and allow people to have some kind of foreknowledge before they go into a tasting room. That's pretty much it. I mean, the rest of your comments are all good, and now I'm waiting to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'll try to be quick. Number one, were we being asked today to simply vote up or down on this ordinance as revised? I vote yes. And I'm glad a number of our previous comments were incorporated. Nevertheless, at the risk of repeating myself, and specifically with reference to menu signs, I think we're overcooking this. I find it objectionable that a restaurant is allowed to post its price list, but another business is not. So I will repeat, establish certain parameters for total signage allowed, whether it's size, quantity, et cetera, and allow each individual business to decide how best to use its signage allotment. So short answer, yes, wine tasting rooms should be allowed to post their menu. I think everybody should get that same privilege, but it shouldn't be an exempt sign. I think one correction or revision I would make, I think the inclusion of borders when measuring sign area, whether when it's on a wall, et cetera, I think that's going to be problematic, and I think that will end up resulting in less interesting signs. Let's think about Edward James Courtyard, which indeed sort of got that planted on sign. It would look better, I think, if it had a border. Under this proposed ordinance, dressing up the appearance of that sign without actually adding any words or signage would increase the total sign area. So
Penalized.
Pardon?
It'd be penalized.
Yes. So I don't think the border itself makes the sign. I think the words make the sign. So, lastly, not lastly, next to last, the two things related with advertising statutory, I have no objection to them at all. I think what's missing is we're trying to shoehorn in the display of merchandise into this advertising statuary component. A wine barrel that has a connection to someone in a tasting room, albeit attenuated, I think that's fine. It's a nice little almost landscape element. Bottles of wine on the deck railing, on the other hand, even if they're filled with colored water, that's different. So I think we need to have a new definition for the display of merchandise, or much like this advertising statutory definition is, if it's reasonably clear that you're representing a product you sell, that's not good. And Bob, well, I think your comments were trenchant about supporting businesses, so let's take the example of Overland. Well, now they've got two mannequins. What if it's next to 8-foot racks of clothes that they roll out every day?
True.
And I don't think any of us want to see that. So again, I think what we're missing is sort of the display of merchandise. Some interesting things might happen at Masonry, that was mentioned earlier. When he's selling statuary, he probably wouldn't be able to put out the pieces he sells, because then I think we'd be calling it a sign in what I'm proposing. On someone else's property, where it's not for sale and they don't sell sculptures, it would be different. So there could be some wrinkles there, but I don't think we want to have people putting their wares out on the sidewalk. And that summarizes my comments. As always, well done on the minutes and the report, and I like the idea of actually seeing the draft revised ordinance. That was very helpful as a way to look at this, and you really incorporated a lot of the suggestions. Thank you.
So I have a question about the Maisonnerie with their big bottles that they have in front. So what you're saying is that would be allowed?
I'm saying it wouldn't be allowed. Right now, I think we would be compelled to conclude that it's advertising statuary and prohibited altogether. I would like to carve out an exception and say advertising statuary is okay unless your advertising statuary is essentially the product you're selling.
But then aren't we over penalizing any art vendors? Or specifically statuary vendors versus wineries?
Yes, we are, but I think the gross good is increased, because currently, it all has to go away. If it somehow suggests what your business is, it's prohibited as advertising statuary. We might not be enforcing it, but as it's written currently, all advertising statuary is prohibited. So I'm trying to find a way that some of it will be allowed.
So you would say that the barrels would be allowed, but the bottles that would sit on top of
Because
the
they're not-
barrels wouldn't be allowed?
Yes. I think that's a line that we can draw, because there need be a line somewhere.
What if the bottle is without a label?
Right.
Is that?
No,
Any
that's,
difference to you?
that's clearly, it's not attenuated enough. The wine barrel, they're not selling wine barrels.
But the distinction is that, yes, they're selling wine, and there's wine bottles, but those are not wine bottles that they are, it's not merchandise they've displayed.
But it
that's
could
for
be.
sale. It's indicative of what's inside for sale, but
It could very well be a bottle they have for sale. It wouldn't be, because we know nobody's going to put a $100 bottle of wine out in the sun on top of a deck railing. But that's the distinction I'm trying to draw.
But they may put, like Summerston has a lot of different labels, they may put 5 of the different labels that they have out there in a bottle filled with sugar water or whatever.
well, the thing we've
So in
been-
that example, a great one, so why can't Overland have a complete rack of clothes out there? Why should they be prohibited from doing that when a tasting room can display 10 different bottles of wine? How is that reasonable? Is it just because we'd rather see bottles of wine on the deck railing than we'd rather see clothes?
I don't know, I mean, the rack of clothes is essentially clearly a retail kind of device, where a mannequin that is wearing this fur thing and it's 100 degrees, is showing that this is how this would fit on a person.
My wife still has a coat that I purchased for her because we were walking by one day and
Saw that mannequin.
she said, "I really like that coat."
It was a mannequin, right?
I don't know if
Did
it
she
was on
see
the
it in a
mannequin or
window,
hanging. No, hanging outside. I don't recall exactly, but I'm married. It was clear, you need to buy me that coat.
And you did.
And I did, and she still has it. Bless
It
her.
worked.
Opportunity is there.
Yeah. So I think it is a fine line. I guess I don't, as a bicycle placed in front of Bistro Gentil is sort of nicely done, and it's not about, it really isn't about the fact that he's French or it's a French restaurant or anything like that. It's just kind of a nice, cool element. If something is tastefully done in a display that actually was the merchandise that was inside, I would tend to.
How would you write the ordinance to say tastefully done is
Yeah.
permitted?
Well, I think that we do that a lot, but I'm not sure. That's because they're highly trained professionals.
Subject to design review.
Exactly, and that is true too.
So I like how you craft that around items that would be sold directly within that establishment aren't allowed to be displayed out like that. And I think wine bottles fit in that. I think wine barrels are clearly, besides people just use them as planters these days, I don't think that's specifically what's being sold there, and I think that'd be okay. I have trouble with singling out, and I don't know even if we can, single out one type of business and have them be overly punished compared to all of the rest of the businesses because they're not allowed to put stuff out because they end up selling statuary.
May I ask a question about, is there a problem we're trying to solve? Are the natives restless about our sign policy? Are we trying to be proactive and futuristic about new sign policy? What's the current level of satisfaction with what we're doing now, things we're talking about amongst ourselves now? Are the commercial enterprises okay with what's going on, or are they really, really unhappy?
Can you see the masses of people
Yeah, I
who
mean,
are
there's-
protesting?
I'm surprised. I could barely get a parking spot. No, really, I just wonder, are we really chasing a problem here, or heading off a problem, addressing a problem?
Well, this particular discussion you're having right now about the display of merchandise versus.
We're deciding we're at the
Statuary.
micro level for sure. But
Yeah,
But
but
these
it was.
these guys enforced a citizen's
that's why I'm
complaint.
asking.
It becomes an enforcement thing because the urge is to, for the business to have, display something related to their, a
course.
motif that's related to their product. And we also don't want to be so oppressive that we suppress creativity either with some ornamentation at the front door. And so it became like, okay, where is the line between someone displaying some object that may be related to their business, and then it gets right into, oh, you're displaying merchandise, can't have it, and then it's an enforcement issue. So is there any room to allow that, is the question we put out there, to allow some level of display of something related to their business, but
I think
keep
we're all
it within
good
the
with that.
bounds
I'm
of-
just wondering if there are really vendors out there who are really upset with us in our
It's not
policy.
upset, it's that over time, they're doing it, and then we got to go out and tell them to, don't do that. And then sometimes it gets to the point where our wine bottle's in the sidecar of a bicycle
Yeah.
that's on the porch.
Yeah.
Is that too
So
much, or?
we do this, and then still down the road, you're going to have to ride out and solve a problem
Oh.
and make a decision and
Yep.
dispense some justice and all that. So it's going to be pretty much like it's going now, but we're just coming into a new millennium here.
It'll continue at the level, it'll pop up here and there, and we'll have to go
But
out
there's
and
no
determine.
outcry of injustice
No,
among
it's not a-
vendors out there.
Not an organized outcry.
Okay, so we're
No Bastille
we're being
movements.
proactive and futuristic in accommodating our vendors and so on with this policy.
So when you guys enforced that, I mean, there was a citizen complaint that they didn't like the idea that there were bottles on the front porch of.
Not even a citizen's complaint. We
thought-
just see them.
I thought that was the impetus for you guys going to deal with
That
that.
one, yeah, that one was a referral, but nevertheless, when we see them, we're supposed to do something about it.
So, I mean, there was a complaint, and then you went and you told them that they couldn't have wine bottles, and so you felt that you were enforcing the sign ordinance, right? So, correct?
Neither business was happy about having to remove their wine bottles. They
Right.
saw that as a
But
real
did you
draw
have a
for
basis in
business.
fact that you, I mean, something in the sign ordinance that said, this is what we need to do?
We based it on the advertising statutory section because it's representative of goods that they sell. It's not something that can be fixed permanently in the landscape, which would be allowed under an application. There's simply no other way of categorizing it.
Displaying merchandise as well.
Right. So essentially, I mean, that's what Jason's saying, is that he's in agreement with what you enforced. Isn't that kind of what's the consensus is right now that we're talking about?
I do like cleaning it up by actually adding the definition of, I don't know how you put it, something that's
Display of merchandise.
display of merchandise.
Of that particular
Of whatever.
retailer, or
Anything that's
whatever
a
it is.
Clear representation of products sold.
Masonry specifically got town council approval for some of their sculpture in their front area. What was that under? Is that a master development? At what point did they get that, and what is it approved as? Do you know?
As part of their master development plan, they're entitled to display certain works of art in certain locations.
So if we pass this, which one trumps which one? The master development plan trumps if we say display of goods, right?
That would have been their use permit.
Right.
Though, right.
Yeah, the use
And I
permit
think that's a
component of
distinction
the-
that's important because the master development plan, that would have run with the property. The use permit expires with the business. So if a new business comes in, they don't necessarily get to say, we get to preserve this.
But which one? If we come up with a
We
New
we don't have the
language.
authority.
Can't trump
yeah,
it.
Yeah,
We
that's
can't,
already
we can't go undo the use
permitted.
permit. And neither really
And that's council level.
will the council
Yeah.
unwind a use permit.
but say if somebody wants to open up a new design studio shop down the street, they would be limited and not be able to put out some of their sculpture.
Without a use permit,
Yeah, without a use permit, it could be approved.
So they'd have to go before the
Okay.
town council.
Then I like this.
I like it too, I just.
I just had to work through it.
Jason has the magic words to describe it,
you're a very handsome
Or-
man.
and we're just
and I like your shorts.
giving feedback now, right?
Yes.
Any final comments,
None for me.
fellas?
I've said plenty.
And so they're still going to be unhappy because they won't be able to put their bottles out. But we're saying they can put their barrels out.
Sufficient feedback?
Yes.
Wonderful. We will move along to staff and board reports. Anyone care to report? Rob, would you care to report your assignment? Do you know it yet?
I don't know. It's probably going to be San Antonio.
That's not so bad.
I'm practicing hanging out outside in this weather. Just
What's
to
the
get
big
a
Air
little
Force
bit
base
of
down there?
feel.
Bliss?
There's actually several. The big ones, Lackland Air Force Base.
yeah.
But there's several.
You practicing your drawl.
I am. And use y'all as much as I possibly
Y'all's good.
can. I got a cowboy hat, so I can
There you
blend in
go.
all
You
that.
need boots too.
Just don't become a Dallas Cowboy fan.
Your military shoot cowboy boots.
Anything else going on?
I hope to see
need to
you
talk
all
about
on
this.
the 22nd at 2 p.m. or thereabouts.
I can't come.
It's the same.
No, she's going to be teaching in Utah.
It's the same day as the art event.
Yeah, the writers,
I think that's
mystery writers.
Different times,
yeah.
2 versus
So you can
5.
just like shoot off your gun and stuff like that, and
Will.
then
I'll
go.
drink whiskey and
then go to
discharge
the writers.
firearms. I have unused fireworks,
And go to
also
the-
permitted in
I know
Yountville.
we adjourned.
And we will have an election next meeting.
Yes, we will.
All right, and we'll
The
welcome Jason at
long-awaited
that time.
election of
Yay.
chair, vice chair will finally come before you.
Good.
Delayed
So
and
do we all
delayed and
agree we
delayed.
should adjourn?
Here.
Here.
Do we all
yes,
agree?
agree.
Okay, good night.
Yay.
Thanks
So
for a
that's-
nice job on
That's
that.
what we do.
Good job, easy.
Oh, yeah.
We're 2 or 3
It was a
hours
short
behind
meeting.
This is a